Joining me now is political consultant Emma Burnell and GB News host of the Saturday Five, coming up later, Darren Grimes, to talk about, well, again, it's a new year. We haven't had any boat crossings since the 16th of December. The storms have gone away slightly, so now the crossings are back. Now, coming to you first on this one, Emma. The boat crossings were 36% down last year, ignoring the bit in December where the storms were probably responsible. Do you think the Rwanda threat is actually working? Even though the plan's not up and running yet, do you think the very threat of it is stopping people crossing?
No.
OK.
I can expand on that. I think that if you are willing to put your life in your hands by crossing one of the world's busiest shipping channels, the idea of a potential future piece of legislation that is largely deemed by most independent commentators to have very little impact, only 1 in 8, even if it were to achieve everything that it promises it would do, something I think is extremely unlikely, about 1 in 80 people coming off a small boat would in fact be sent to Rwanda. Those odds are not going to deter people who are putting their lives in their hands to get here. So frankly, no. As I say, I have expanded, but ultimately the answer is simply no. No.
OK. So, Darren, so it's 36% down last year. I mean, that is a fact. Why do we think that is the case, then?
So, look, I put that entirely down to the fact that last year the weather wasn't too great, right? I don't put that down to Rishi Sunak's deterrent plan or Rishi Sunak doing anything, frankly. If you ask me, Dawn, we're doing a better job at policing the Red Sea than we are the English Channel.
Yes.
And I find that absolutely extraordinary. People are just so frustrated, emailing in. As you well know, you've got your emails right there in front of you, and they're saying time and time again, why can we not do what Australia did, which is put people in unsinkable vessels, lifeboats essentially, and tow them back, push them back? Because once people get here, as Robert Jenrick said, and Robert Jenrick, by the way, was one of Rishi Sunak's closest political allies. This isn't someone who's on the opposite side of the fence or the party to him. And he's saying they get to come here, and as soon as they're here, they turn around and say, well, I can't possibly go to Rwanda because of X, Y, and Z. And then that's it. Their human rights claim is dismissed outright, and that's it. They're allowed to stay in this country. So we've got to stop people coming here. That's the ultimate deterrent. And we're just not willing to do that, Dawn.
So, I mean, that's a point, and Darren's right, Emma. A lot of people are saying, well, hold on a minute, we can police the Red Sea, which is obviously, a long way away, but we can't police a piece of water that's on our doorsteps.
Well, I mean, we're firing missiles in the Red Sea. Certainly the US are, and we've been in support of that. I don't think that's something we want to do in the middle of the English Channel. So they are different responses that are required. I mean, yeah, the government have failed to do the things that are needed. Now, I, as someone on the more liberal side of the argument, would say different things are needed than perhaps Darren would. But either way, what they've found themselves in is complete stasis, where they haven't pleased people with my side of the argument, they haven't pleased people with Darren's side of the argument. I think what's worth looking at, because we've gone over again and again, Darren and I have had this discussion, you and I have had this discussion, I've been on this channel many times, talking about what does and doesn't work. I think why it's politically salient now are two things. First of all, Rishi Sunak made certain promises in January of last year. Now, when you make a promise in January, you're expected to deliver on that promise by December the 31st. It's like a resolution. We all know that that's your promise to yourself for the year, and if you don't achieve it by the end of the year, you have failed that resolution. Rishi Sunak has failed that resolution. He's failed in that promise he made to the country. The other thing is, and it's a psychological thing, but it does have a big impact in terms of elections, is that there is a great deal of difference between a boat that arrives on the 30th of December and a boat that arrives today, because this is election year. And people are paying that little bit more attention because they know they'll be going to the polling station this year.
Darren, that's a good point. I mean, the timing could not be worse with the Rwanda bill going back before Parliament this week, with people like Suella Braverman saying, I'm not going to support it unless it's tougher. I mean, the Conservative Party is incredibly divided on this. The Labour Party are incredibly divided on it. They don't actually seem to have a policy. I mean, Keir Starmer says it's going to be tough, but not exactly explained how. Do you think this is actually going to give more support to parties like Reform?
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, you know, I'm not for 1 second suggesting that we fire missiles in the English Channel, but I do think
there are some that are.
I'm sure there are some that are.
But I do think actually the Royal Navy could be involved in pushing back if we actually had the will to do it. I do think that's something that is entirely within the government's gift and within the House of Commons gift. If they wanted to stop this, they could stop it. They have the powers to do so. I am so sick, Dawn, of being told that we need to respect international law. Well, what about domestic ability to actually control our own borders? Instead of this constantly saying to this activist court in Strasbourg, well, we've got to listen to these guys. How about listening to the people that put their trust in you in 2019 for the very first time, millions of them, Dawn, voted Conservative and actually said, well, you know, both Labour and Conservative were two cheeks of the same behind, essentially, and we're going to ignore the wishes of the British people. I think that's fundamentally dangerous for democracy. I think it's dangerous for trust in politics. I think it breeds the kind of cynicism and resentment that we saw perhaps before Brexit. And Brexit, I think, was almost like releasing gas from a valve because people thought, right, we're going to actually get what we voted for the first time. That hasn't materialised. So I think you're right, Dawn. Richard Tice is probably going to be laughing all the way to the ballot box.
And he is targeting, the party is targeting both Labour and Conservatives, as we know. I mean, as you say, Emma, we have gone over and over this time and time again. But, you know, maybe Darren's got a point. Maybe, you know, the Royal Navy should stop these boats, send them back to France, which is a safe country at the end of the day.
Well, interestingly, I was actually having this conversation with your previous guest, who is a far greater military strategist, has a greater understanding of military capability and what they can and can't do than I do, and he said that that wasn't really a viable option. I think in terms of...
Why?
Ask him, because I very, very much... defer to people who understand the military far better than I do.
Well, Australia managed it.
But Australia, I think part of the issue is Australia was sending them back to country of origin and towing them back to country of origin. There's a difference between towing them back to country of origin and towing them back to a different third country. I think that in terms of the policy thing is different. In terms of Royal Navy capability and whether they'd be the right option, again, I defer to the person I just spoke to, a military expert who said it wasn't viable. In terms of Reform, I think that there will be an impact in terms of their votes with the salience of this issue. Rishi Sunak only has himself to blame for that by making it such a salient issue. But I think there are questions, because Reform are not likely to form the next government. I think even the most optimistic supporter of Reform would say that. So they can make promises that are unachievable. And I think the problem is that does stoke cynicism, and I would say that is equally a problem of cynicism from that perspective as well.
Unfortunately, we have to move on. I think what we're hearing from pretty much every party is promises that I think deep down we all know none of them can actually keep.